the US and the UK have slowly been going through a withdrawal in Afghanistan. So
I think it's the entire coalition, isn't it? Like,
yeah,
I can't remember
yes,
how
it
many
is.
countries are involved.
So we're leaving it under the kind of autonomy of the Afghan government with some kind of outside support. But Hugo's got a good article on our website about the gradual end of the war in Afghanistan, where he said on the 4th of July that US and NATO were in the process of withdrawing from their bases after about 20 years of fighting. Of course, we went into Afghanistan after 9/11, the attacks in 2001, targeting...
We said to the Afghan government, who were the Taliban, you've got bin Laden, Gibbs. And they said...
Yeah, they didn't want to cooperate with us,
They
did
said,
they?
make us, so we did. And he ended up turning out to be in Pakistan.
Yeah, well, funny that, isn't it? But that's a whole other kettle of fish. But anyway, after several months of fighting Al-Qaeda, we basically whittled their numbers down to a point where we shifted our focus to the Taliban, who, of course, impeded us getting to them in the first place. And, of course, there is the fact as well that in 1980, the CIA funded, armed and trained the Taliban to fight the USSR. So we did turn against our former allies, against the Soviets, which quite often happens in these sorts of things. But to move on to the modern day, this withdrawal obviously is an admission of defeat, right? We weren't able to get rid of them, and here they are taking over things, and it's just been quiet. Supposedly, in Bagram Air Base, the US just slunk away in the night without telling anyone. It's like they're embarrassed. It's like,
I'll see you tomorrow, mate, and they're just not there.
Yeah, well, we didn't even tell the Afghan government's forces that we were, well, I say we, but the US was leaving, so they didn't even know. So they must have turned up to the base thinking that, oh, hello, and then there's no one there. So it's a little bit strange, but I suppose from a tactical standpoint and the logistics, you don't want to tell anyone that you're moving because then you'll be vulnerable. So I think that's probably what they did. But anyway, the withdrawal agreement wasn't actually done under Biden. It was signed by Trump in the Doha agreement last year. So to say, oh, it's Biden's fault is to be a bit uncharitable here. Biden has continued on with the agreement, as you know, is customary. It's not very good for the US to then go back on an agreement when the president changes.
But I mean, even going back to Obama, people have been trying to leave Afghanistan for a long time.
Well, yeah, it's one of those things where had you told someone that invading will take 20 years and then you'll lose in the end anyway, I imagine people would be even more skeptical of it in the first place. So, when Biden was vice president, he stated, nation building was a waste of time and instead the US should focus on a standoff approach to counter-terrorism using airstrikes and special forces raids. And I think that's the position that he still maintains. I don't necessarily disagree either. I think having boots on the ground is just an unnecessary risk of our soldiers' lives.
Well, regime change, like when you're overthrowing an entire country or whatnot. Like just send some special forces to deal with it or some guys to guard areas sounds better.
I mean, it's not like the current government is particularly inept either. They've been trained by the US over a number of years. They're not to Western standards, but, a lot better than they were beforehand. But anyway, the war in Afghanistan so far has seen 2,300 US troops killed, 405 UK troops killed, and the US has spent about $1 trillion in keeping the country so-called secure, which it hasn't. So, I mean, make of that what you will, whether it's worthwhile, but I think to most people, they probably think that was a waste of a lot of lives and money for very little in return. I mean, the Taliban now controls about half of the country. But anyway, the Taliban so far has captured 9 out of 10 districts in the capital of Helmand province. I'm sure you've heard Helmand province quite a lot. It's part of southern Afghanistan where the Taliban are particularly popular, as opposed to the north, where the capital of Kabul is.
Every time there's a dead British soldier, it's Helmand usually.
Yeah, Helmand became like synonymous with people being killed by the Taliban. So the district of Lashkar Gah, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, this is where they seized the 9 out of 10 districts, which there's currently an ongoing conflict with the Afghan government's forces, and they've also seized things such as TV and radio stations, so they've got a decent amount of infrastructure to try and recruit other people, and apparently the Taliban are keeping people in their homes and preventing them from leaving, so at least they've got something in common with the UK government.
I was about to say, yeah. No alcohol. You must self-isolate. Hands, face, mouth, whatever it is.
They're also preventing people from actually leaving and getting supplies, so I think they've taken a little bit further, unsurprisingly. So people are having to stay in their homes under force of violence, even if they have no food. So it's obviously a horrendous humanitarian thing. And
but also the Taliban are Islamists. They are proper Islamists. The Quran says so, so do it. So, it's not just stay in your homes. It's entirely...
Obey the will of Allah, right?
It's an Islamic state. Let's just leave it at that.
So in Lashkar-Gah, the residents have been encouraged to evacuate, and so far 100,000 civilians have done so. Just to kind of put this in perspective, only yesterday 40 civilians were killed that we know about. And this is only one of 3 of the province capitals that are currently under attack by the Taliban. So far, they've also targeted specifically airports in the cities of Kandahar and Herat, and General Sadat of the Afghan government's military said to the citizens, I mention this because it was just unusually polite. It's in the middle of a civil war, more or less, maybe a war, however you want to define it. But he says, I know it is very difficult for you to leave your houses. It is hard for us too, but if you are displaced for a few days, please forgive us. And I've included this just for a bit of...
Has he been trained by the British?
Yeah, well, we've been training him in grammar while the US has been training him in...
Terribly sorry, chaps, but we had to blow up their house. Oh,
it's just like, you're being forced to stay in your homes, but we're ever so sorry that you have to leave. I mean, okay, that's not really relevant to the entire picture, but I just thought it was nice that he was so polite about it. You've got to appreciate these things and horrendously depressing stories. But so yeah, he said to the BBC as well that he believed the Taliban would not be able to sustain their efforts because, of course, they're not quite as well funded as the government itself. One civilian said to the BBC that neither the Taliban will have mercy on us, nor the government will stop the bombing. There are corpses on the roads. We do not know if they are civilians or Taliban. So that's the picture on the ground. They kind of feel a little bit hopeless, as you probably would, because, of course, you've lived in amongst it for 20 years. I imagine you're going to see it as something that can't be resolved. So the Afghan president has issued a call to arms against the Taliban, saying that this is President Afram Ghani, which sounds confusingly like Afghani, but nevertheless, he's calling for a holy war against the Taliban, saying, "We have done our best and are still doing our best to save the nation from these brutal killers of humanity. Our security plan is clear. We have made all the preparations to put an end to this wave of sedition in the next 6 months and reach a state of stability. An important element of this plan is the mobilization of people alongside our security defense forces. Our aspiration was to achieve lasting and just peace from the beginning, and we still have that aspiration. But this war has been imposed on us. It is God's command that if someone is an aggressor and does not stop aggression, fighting against that evil is a duty of a Muslim society."
Feels weird to gin up religious language to fight the Taliban, but whatever.
Well, it's good because the Taliban are recruiting from religious zealots, right? So if you can win them to your side and use that same language back at them, then it's effective, I think.
Islamic S-hole countries are always going to be like this, aren't they? But is there any chance of the Taliban losing this, or is it just are they going to win, or is it just be endless war?
Well,
or what?
It's funny you should say that because this next article by Al Jazeera does a really good job of comparing the two forces against one another. So although the Taliban controls half of Afghanistan's districts so far, the total strength of the Afghan National Security Forces, including the Army, Special Forces, Air Force, Police and Intelligence, was more than 307,000. So this was at the end of April, whereas the UN Security Council's estimation is that the Taliban number between 55,000 and 85,000, so they're severely outnumbered by pretty much even the most liberal of estimates there. And
I have to wonder how loyal those numbers are, though. Because I remember watching that documentary, This Is What Winning Looks Like, in which one of the, I think it was Vice who ended up publishing it. This guy went down there, he just interviewed people in Helmand and whatnot, the police, the army and whatnot, and they were useless. They were just there for the pay to get high, nothing else. They were paper forces.
Well, I mean, we have been training them for a long time, so hopefully something has changed. Even so, they're probably going to be better than the Taliban just by merit of their equipment. So
Taliban will be better. Veteran fighters.
I don't know about that.
Okay, but whatever.
They've probably all been blown up by now. They're probably fresh, new, young faces, I imagine. But Afghanistan spends about 5 to 6 billion US dollars annually on its military, whereas the Taliban spends between 300 million to 1.5 billion a year. So spending is very different as well. It's also worth adding that the US subsidizes 75% of the Afghanistani military budget. So that's your tax money. And of course, the Taliban, rather than being funded by the US, is funded by narcotics, extorting businesses, and imposing taxes on the locals.
And Pakistan, but let's not mention that.
Well, we can't make allegations, but maybe.
Only when they're blatant.
In terms of equipment, the US has spent billions on ensuring that the Afghan defense forces are superior to the Taliban. They have Western rifles, night vision goggles, armored vehicles, artillery, surveillance drones. They also have an air force, which the Taliban do not, which includes a fleet of 167 aircraft, including attack helicopters and a SIGAR. I don't know what that is. SIGAR. Someone's going to correct me and call me an idiot, but fair enough. So the Taliban, of course, as you can imagine, are only equipped with small arms such as AK-47s, RPGs, and anti-aircraft rocket launchers, snipers, and IEDs, the latter of which, of course, being the most deadly. And, of course, the Taliban have captured some Western equipment that was left behind by the Americans. I don't know how you do this. Just like, yeah, let's just leave these guns behind. So, well done. Your sneaky withdrawal wasn't as good as you thought. However, on the kind of Taliban's defense is that their morale is a lot higher than the Afghan forces because they have the forces of religious zealotry behind them, alongside the fact that the Afghan forces have had quite bad losses. And of course, the Taliban taking half the country can't be good for morale, right? You must feel pretty inept if you've got all of that Western power backing you and you can't even keep...
Well, you couldn't even win the war originally. So.
Well, yeah, I suppose so. And just to emphasise how kind of bad it is at the minute, just this morning, this was only a few hours ago, there was a terrorist attack targeting the guest house of Defence Minister Bismillah Khan Mohammadi, which killed 8 civilians. And thankfully it didn't kill the actual Defence Minister they were going after. But it just goes to show that the chaos is ongoing. But hopefully based on just the vast difference between the Afghan force and the Taliban, and with US financial and hopefully bombing and special forces support, they should be able to win. But at the minute, it's not looking particularly good for the people on the ground.
Well, they haven't been able to win all the whole time, so I'm sort of just like, well, the best circumstance is hopefully it just remains a war over there forever, I guess. I don't know what else to wish for.
I think just by the sheer numbers, like, they're outnumbered like 3-1. So even now, John says SIGAR reported it's an agency. Okay, Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. Okay, I must have just misread that, but thank you. So to kind of end that, things aren't looking good, but there is chances that things have changed, and hopefully the training that we're providing and the support that we're providing is enough. But make of our choice to withdraw what you will.
If you enjoyed this segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can watch the full broadcast live every weekday at 1 PM UK time on lotuseaters.com.